The voice came from the tree line at exactly 3:47 a.m., and it sounded like Rebecca's dead mother. Not similar, not reminiscent, identical. Every inflection, every slight rasp from decades of Marlboro Reds, the way she always said "sweetheart" with that particular softness reserved for her only granddaughter. Thomas Carter stood at the window of their Appalachian cabin, his breath fogging the glass, watching the darkness between the pines where the voice had originated. Then it came again. "Emma, sweetheart, come outside. Grandma needs to tell you something." But Rebecca's mother had been dead for 3 years, buried in the family plot in Knoxville, and whatever was out there in the woods was using her voice like a key, trying to unlock the door to their daughter's heart. The thing that called itself Sarah Whitmore had been watching the family for 6 days now, circling their property on 4 legs that weren't quite wolf and weren't quite human, feeling the hunger that never stopped, the terrible knowing that she had become exactly what the old Cherokee shaman had warned her about. She could taste their fear on the mountain wind, smell the sweat that broke out on Thomas's skin as he gripped the shotgun tighter, hear the rapid heartbeat of 16-year-old Emma stirring in her bedroom above. But what tortured Sarah most was that she remembered being human, remembered her own daughter's face, remembered the accident that had brought her to these mountains 5 years ago, seeking healing and finding only transformation. Now she stood on too many legs beneath the ancient hemlocks, her throat shaping words in voices that weren't hers, driven by an instinct older than the mountains themselves. When Rebecca's mother's voice called out again, "Emma, please, I'm so cold out here," Sarah felt the human part of herself scream in protest, even as her skinwalker nature forced the words out, each syllable a violation of everything she'd once been. What was she now? What had she become in these endless woods, where the old magic still lived in the bones of the earth? If you connect with my story, please press the like button to find some light in this priest's heart. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next life stories, and tell me about them in the comments where you are watching this video and what time it is right now. It makes me very happy to know that from any corner of the country or the world, you are listening to me. Sarah Whitmore hadn't always been a monster. 5 years ago, she'd been a 34-year-old high school English teacher from Charleston, South Carolina, with a laugh that filled rooms and a daughter named Lily, who was everything good in the world. The car accident on Highway 441 should have killed her. Maybe it would have been kinder if it had. Instead, she'd crawled from the wreckage with a shattered spine and a prognosis that promised years of agony followed by paralysis. Desperate and broken, she'd driven deeper into the Appalachian Mountains, following rumors of a Cherokee healer who could cure anything. What she'd found instead was Elijah Redbone, a 67-year-old shaman with eyes like storm clouds who'd told her the truth she should have heeded. Some healings came with prices, some transformations couldn't be undone, some hungers, once awakened, would never sleep again. But Sarah had been drowning in pain, unable to imagine a future where she couldn't hold her daughter, couldn't dance, couldn't even stand. So when Elijah had presented the choice, remain human and broken, or accept the old medicine that would make her whole again, she'd chosen transformation. She hadn't understood what wholeness would cost. Now as she circled the Carter family's cabin in the heart of the Smoky Mountains, wearing a shape that was neither wolf nor woman, Sarah understood everything. The ritual had healed her spine, given her strength beyond human limits, allowed her to run through these mountains without pain for the first time in a year. But it had also awakened something ancient and terrible inside her, something that fed on fear and confusion, that compelled her to call out in stolen voices, to hunt in ways that violated everything her human heart still remembered about decency and love. The Carter family had moved to this isolated cabin 6 months ago, fleeing the chaos of Atlanta after Thomas lost his job at Delta Airlines during the pandemic. Rebecca had thought the mountains would heal them, give them space to reconnect as a family. Their daughter Emma had been struggling with anxiety and depression, spending too many hours on her phone, too many nights crying in her room. 11-year-old Jacob had been having nightmares about the divorce proceedings they'd narrowly avoided after Thomas's affair had come to light. The cabin was supposed to be a fresh start, a return to simplicity, a place where they could hike and fish and remember why they'd fallen in love in the first place. Sarah had been watching them since they arrived, drawn by something she couldn't name. At first, she'd told herself it was just hunger, just the skinwalker's need to hunt, to feed on the fear of the living. But as days turned to weeks, she'd realized it was something else. Something about the way Rebecca touched Thomas's shoulder when she thought no one was looking, forgiveness offered despite betrayal. Something about Emma's fierce protectiveness over her little brother, the way she'd walk him to the bus stop every morning, even though she was exhausted. Something about Jacob's innocent wonder at every bird, every flower, every sunset over the mountains. They reminded Sarah of what she'd lost, of the family she could never return to, of the daughter who believed her mother had died in that car accident 5 years ago, because that's what Elijah had told the authorities, what the evidence had suggested. The first 3 nights Sarah had only circled the property, learning their patterns, their rhythms, their vulnerabilities. Thomas locked the doors at exactly 10 p.m. every night, then checked them twice more before bed. Rebecca read in the living room until midnight, unable to sleep, sipping chamomile tea that never quite calmed her nerves. Emma stayed up until 2 a.m. on her phone, texting friends back in Atlanta who were slowly forgetting she existed. Jacob slept like the innocent child he was, usually with his golden retriever Murphy curled at his feet. On the 4th night, Sarah had gotten closer, pressing her face against Emma's bedroom window, watching the girl scroll through Instagram photos of parties she'd missed, tears sliding down her face. The skinwalker part of Sarah had wanted to tap on the glass, to whisper promises in the voices of Emma's friends, to lure her outside, but the human part, the mother part, had pulled back, retreating into the forest with a howl that sounded too much like sobbing. On the 5th night, she'd killed a deer near the property line, leaving it where Thomas would find it on his morning walk. She'd told herself it was a warning, a way to make them leave before the hunger became too strong to resist. But really, it had been a gift, meat for their freezer, a provider's instinct that had no place in a monster. Now, on the 6th night, the hunger had grown teeth. Sarah could feel it gnawing at her from the inside, demanding she call them out, demanding she feed on their terror. So she'd started with the voice of Rebecca's mother, the grandmother Emma had adored, the woman whose funeral had marked the beginning of Emma's depression. The old magic gave skinwalkers access to the voices of the dead, pulled them from memories and grief, shaped them into perfect mimicry. Every word Sarah spoke in that stolen voice was an agony, a violation of the sacred bond between grandmother and grandchild, but she couldn't stop herself. The hunger was too strong, the compulsion too ancient. Inside the cabin, Emma had heard the voice. She'd sat up in bed, her heart racing, her breath coming in short gasps. For a moment, a terrible, hopeful moment, she'd believed it was real. That somehow her grandmother had come back, that death wasn't final, that the universe could be kind enough to give her one more conversation, one more hug, one more piece of advice about how to survive being 16 and lost. Then logic had reasserted itself, cold and cruel. The dead stayed dead. Grandma was gone. This was something else. Thomas had heard it too, had grabbed his shotgun from the closet and positioned himself by the window. He'd grown up in these mountains, had heard the stories his grandfather told about things that walked between worlds, about creatures that wore human skin like clothes, about voices in the dark that weren't what they seemed. He'd always thought they were just stories, Appalachian folklore meant to keep children from wandering too far from home. Now, staring out at the tree line, where his dead mother-in-law's voice was calling for his daughter, he understood that some stories were warnings. Rebecca had come downstairs, her face pale, her hands trembling. She'd heard it from the bedroom, that impossible voice, and for a moment she'd been a little girl again, safe in her mother's kitchen, smelling cornbread and listening to stories about her mother's own childhood in these mountains. Then the wrongness of it had crashed over her like ice water. Her mother was dead, cremated, her ashes scattered over the Tennessee River like she'd requested. Whatever was out there wasn't her mother. It was something that knew how to hurt them in the deepest possible way, something that understood that the cruelest weapon wasn't claws or teeth but memory, loss, the aching void where love used to live. Sarah watched them gather in the living room, watched Thomas check the locks while Rebecca held Jacob, who'd woken crying from the noise. She watched Emma stand at her window, staring out at the darkness, her young face caught between hope and horror. The Skinwalker hunger surged, demanding she call again, demanding she try different voices, demanding she find the key that would unlock their door. But Sarah fought it, clinging to the last shreds of her humanity, remembering Lily's face on her 8th birthday, the way she'd laughed when Sarah had surprised her with a puppy. That memory was an anchor, a lifeline, the only thing that kept Sarah from becoming purely monster. She backed away from the cabin, her 4 legs carrying her deeper into the forest, her throat raw from forcing out words in voices that didn't belong to her. The night air was cold enough to see her breath, or it would have been if skinwalkers breathed like humans. Instead, she panted like the wolf she partly was, her tongue lolling, her body burning with the fever that came with transformation. 3 miles into the forest, Sarah found the cave where she'd been living since the change. It was shallow, barely deep enough to shelter her from rain, but it was all she could manage. Skinwalkers didn't build homes, didn't need comfort, didn't feel cold the way humans did. But Sarah still tried to hold on to human habits, human needs, human memories. She'd dragged pine boughs into the cave to make a bed. She'd found an old tarp and fashioned it into a roof of sorts. She'd even kept a few possessions from her old life, hidden in a crevice at the back of the cave. A photograph of Lily, her wedding ring from a marriage that had ended in divorce 2 years before the accident, a copy of Pride and Prejudice that she'd read so many times the pages were falling out. These things didn't make sense for a monster to keep, but Sarah wasn't fully monster yet. She was caught between, trapped in a transformation that had promised healing, but delivered only hunger and horror. As she curled up on the pine boughs, her body slowly shifting back toward something more human-shaped, she let herself cry. The tears came out wrong, too thick, almost like blood, but they were still tears, and they still meant she was capable of grief, which meant she was still capable of being saved, wasn't it? The next morning, Thomas found tracks around the cabin. They started as human footprints, bare feet in the soft earth, but midway through their circuit they shifted into something else. Something with claws, something that walked on 4 legs but occasionally rose up on 2, something that had stood outside each window, looking in, learning, planning. He didn't tell Rebecca about the tracks. She was already terrified, already talking about leaving, about going back to Atlanta, where the dangers were human and comprehensible. Thomas had spent the early morning hours researching on his phone, reading everything he could find about skinwalkers, about Appalachian folklore, about creatures that stole voices. What he'd found had chilled him more than the cold mountain air. According to Cherokee legend, skinwalkers were human witches who'd performed forbidden rituals, who'd killed family members to gain their powers, who'd chosen to become monsters. But there were older stories too, darker ones about people who'd been transformed against their will, who'd sought healing from desperate shamans and received curses instead. Those skinwalkers were different, the stories said. They retained some humanity, fought against their nature, suffered in ways pure monsters never did. Thomas wanted to believe the thing outside their cabin was the first kind, a pure monster he could hate without guilt. But something about the way it had called out, the way it had retreated when Emma had approached the window, suggested it might be the second kind, the dangerous kind, the kind that was still human enough to love, and therefore human enough to truly hate itself. Emma hadn't slept after the voice had called to her. She'd sat at her window until dawn, watching the tree line, waiting for her grandmother's voice to call out again. Part of her knew it was impossible, knew her grandmother was gone, knew this was some kind of trick or hallucination or mountain madness. But another part, the part that had been drowning in grief and depression for 3 years, wanted desperately to believe, wanted to think that death wasn't the end, that love could transcend the grave, that somewhere out there in those dark woods was her grandmother's spirit, waiting to comfort her one more time. As the sun rose over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Emma made a decision. Tonight, if the voice came again, she would answer it. She would go outside. She would find out what was calling to her, even if it killed her. Because living with this uncertainty, this terrible hope mixed with soul-crushing fear, was worse than death. At least death would be an ending. At least death would be peace. Rebecca spent the morning trying to maintain normalcy for Jacob's sake. She made pancakes for breakfast, helped him with his homework, pretended everything was fine even as her hands shook, and her mind kept replaying that voice, her mother's voice, calling from the darkness. Jacob was too young to fully understand what was happening. He knew something had scared his parents, knew there had been weird noises in the night, but he bounced back the way children did, already focused on the fort he was building in the woods behind the cabin. Rebecca wanted to tell him no, wanted to keep him inside where it was safe, but she also didn't want to transfer her fear to him, didn't want to steal his childhood innocence. So she let him go, watched from the kitchen window as he and Murphy explored the tree line, and prayed to a God she wasn't sure she believed in anymore, that whatever was out there would spare her baby boy. Sarah had spent the day in human form, or as close to human as she could manage. It took enormous concentration to hold the shape, to keep her hands from developing claws, to keep her face from elongating into a muzzle, to keep her thoughts from dissolving into the red fog of hunger. She'd walked to the small town of Elkmont, 15 miles down the mountain, moving through the trees where hikers wouldn't see her. The town was dying like so many Appalachian towns, just a general store, a post office, and a Baptist church that had seen better days. Sarah had stolen clothes from a donation box behind the church, jeans that were too big, a flannel shirt that smelled like mothballs, sneakers that pinched her feet. Dressed like a human, she could almost pass for normal if no one looked too closely at her eyes, which had taken on a yellow tint that no contact lenses could hide. She'd used the computer at the library, ignoring the suspicious looks from the librarian who'd never seen her before. She'd searched for news about herself, about Sarah Whitmore, the woman who'd disappeared 5 years ago after a car accident. There wasn't much. A brief obituary her ex-husband had written, mentioning their daughter Lily, now 13 years old, living in Charleston with her father and his new wife. A few social media posts from former colleagues who'd known her, expressing sadness at her passing. But mostly, the world had moved on. Sarah Whitmore was forgotten, erased, replaced by this thing that wore her name and memories like ill-fitting clothes. She'd also searched for information about Elijah Redbone, the shaman who'd transformed her. She'd found his website, surprisingly modern for a man his age, advertising traditional Cherokee healing spirit walks and vision quests. There was no mention of skinwalker transformations, no hint of the dark magic he'd offered her that desperate night 5 years ago. But in the testimonials section, Sarah found others like her. People who'd come to Elijah broken and left changed. They wrote in code, thanking him for showing them the old ways and helping them run with the night. Sarah had memorized Elijah's address, a remote property deeper in the mountains, near the Tennessee-North Carolina border. She needed to see him, needed to ask if there was a way back, if the transformation could be undone. But more than that, she needed to understand why he'd done this to her. Why he'd taken a desperate woman and turned her into a monster, why he'd let her believe she was choosing healing when really she was choosing damnation. As the sun began to set, Sarah had made her way back through the forest toward the Carter cabin, the hunger rising in her with the moon, her human clothes falling away as her body shifted back into the form it preferred, the form the magic had given her, the form that was neither wolf nor woman, but something older and more terrible than both. Night fell over the Smoky Mountains like a curtain, and with it came the cold. Thomas had spent the afternoon reinforcing the cabin's defenses, checking windows, testing locks, even nailing boards over the basement access where he'd found fresh scratch marks. He'd driven into town and bought ammunition, industrial-strength flashlights, and 3 gallons of kerosene just in case. The clerk at the hardware store, an old man named Vernon who'd lived in these mountains his whole life, had looked at Thomas's purchases and asked quietly, "Having trouble with something that walks at night?" Thomas had nodded, and Vernon had added a box of salt to his purchases, refusing payment. "Pure salt," Vernon had said. "Make a line of it across your threshold. Old magic don't like crossing salt." Thomas had wanted to laugh, to dismiss it as superstition, but he'd taken the salt. He'd take anything that might protect his family. Rebecca had called her sister in Knoxville, had tried to explain what was happening without sounding insane. "Something's wrong with this place," she'd said. "Something's watching us. Her sister had suggested carbon monoxide poisoning, shared hallucinations, stress from the move. All reasonable explanations, all wrong. Rebecca had hung up feeling more alone than ever. There was no help coming. No one would believe them. They were on their own in these mountains, stalked by something that knew they're dead, that spoke in stolen voices, that wanted them for reasons they couldn't comprehend. Emma had spent the day preparing. She'd written letters to her parents and Jacob, sealed them in envelopes and hidden them under her mattress. She'd charged her phone fully, downloaded a voice recording app, and tested it to make sure it worked. If she was going to confront whatever was out there, she was going to document it. She was going to have proof, even if that proof was only discovered after she was gone. Jacob had built his fort and returned home muddy and happy, Murphy following with a stick in his mouth. For him, it had been a perfect day. He had no idea that tonight might be the night that changed everything. As darkness settled over the cabin, the family gathered in the living room again, just as they had the night before. Thomas sat by the window with his shotgun. Rebecca tried to read, but the words swam on the page. Emma pretended to do homework while her heart hammered in her chest, waiting. Jacob played with his toy cars on the floor, Murphy's head in his lap, both of them innocent to the tension crackling through the air like electricity before a storm. Sarah circled the cabin, her paws silent on the carpet of pine needles, her breath misting in the cold night air. The hunger was stronger tonight, a living thing with claws that tore at her from the inside, demanding she call them out, demanding she feed. But tonight, she tried something different. Instead of calling out in the voice of the dead, she used a voice they'd all recognize. She used her own voice, Sarah's voice, human and desperate and broken. "Help me," she called from the tree line, her words barely more than a whisper, but carrying clearly in the mountain stillness. "Please, someone help me. I'm lost. I'm hurt. I don't know where I am." It was the truth in a way. She was lost. She was hurt. And she had no idea where she truly was anymore, caught between human and monster, between mercy and hunger. Inside the cabin, Emma heard the voice and recognized it immediately as different from the night before. This wasn't her grandmother. This was someone young, female, terrified. This was someone who needed help. She moved toward the door before she could stop herself, her hand reaching for the lock. "Emma, no!" Thomas shouted, crossing the room in 3 long strides and grabbing her arm. "It's the same thing. Different voice, same trick." But Emma pulled away, her eyes blazing. "Dad, what if it's real? What if someone's actually hurt out there? What if we let someone die because we were too scared to help?" It was the eternal dilemma of the good-hearted, the compassionate, the ones who'd been raised to help others. How do you balance caution with kindness? How do you protect yourself while still being human? Rebecca joined them at the door, her face torn. "Thomas, what if Emma's right? What if there really is someone hurt?" Thomas wanted to scream, that they were being manipulated, that this was exactly what the thing wanted, that opening that door would be the end of them. But he looked at his wife, his daughter, and saw in their eyes the quality that had made him fall in love with them both, their capacity for compassion, their unwillingness to let fear turn them into the kind of people who'd let others suffer. "Fine," he said, his jaw tight. "But we do this smart. Emma, Rebecca, Jacob, you stay inside, doors locked. I'll go out, check around, see if there's actually someone there." He loaded his shotgun, the sound of the shells clicking into place loud in the quiet room. "If I'm not back in 10 minutes, you call the sheriff, you grab Jacob, and you drive down this mountain as fast as that car will take you. Understand?" Rebecca nodded, tears in her eyes. Emma hugged him tight, whispering, "Be careful, Dad." Jacob looked up from his cars, finally sensing the gravity of the situation. "Daddy," he said, his voice small, "are you going to fight the monster?" Thomas knelt down, ruffled his son's hair. "There's no monster, buddy. Just a lost person who needs help. I'll be right back." It was a lie, and they all knew it, but sometimes lies were kinder than truth. Thomas stepped out onto the porch, the shotgun heavy in his hands, his breath clouding in the cold air. The motion sensor lights he'd installed that afternoon blazed to life, illuminating a circle of yard around the cabin, but making the forest beyond seem darker by contrast. "Hello?" he called out. "This is private property. If you need help, step into the light where I can see you." For a moment, there was only silence. Then the voice came again, closer now, from just beyond the light's reach. "Please, I can't. I'm hurt. I think my leg is broken. Can you help me?" The voice was young, frightened, and so convincingly real that even Thomas, who knew better, felt his resolve waver. He took a step forward, then another, the shotgun raised, his finger on the trigger but not yet pulling. "Stay where you are," he called. "I'm coming to you, but I'm armed, and I will shoot if you're not what you say you are." Sarah watched him approach, saw the fear and determination warring in his face, smelled the sweat that fear produced, heard his heart hammering. The hunger screamed at her to strike, to shift fully into monster form, to tear and rend and feed. But the human part, the Sarah part, held back. This was a good man trying to help someone he thought was in danger. This was a father protecting his family while still clinging to his humanity. This was who she'd been once, before the transformation, before the hunger, before everything had gone so terribly wrong. When Thomas was 10 feet away, Sarah stepped out of the shadows, and for just a moment, she let him see her as she truly was. Not the wolf thing, not the monster with too many teeth, but the woman she'd been. 34 years old with brown hair and green eyes and a face that had once been kind. She let him see the tears on her cheeks, the humanity in her gaze, the desperate plea for understanding. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice her own now, not stolen, not performed. "I'm so sorry. I don't want to be this. I don't want to hurt you, but I don't know how to stop." Thomas saw her, really saw her, and in that moment understood something that changed everything. This wasn't just a monster. This was someone's daughter, someone's mother, someone who'd been human once and was fighting to stay human still. His finger eased off the trigger slightly, not lowering the gun but not shooting either. "What happened to you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Sarah's form flickered, her human shape struggling to hold against the hunger's pressure. "I made a choice," and she said, "a bad choice. I was hurt and someone offered me healing, and I took it without understanding the cost. Now I'm this, and I can't go back, and the hunger never stops, and I—" Her voice broke, and for a moment she was just a woman crying in the dark, mourning everything she'd lost. Then the hunger surged, too strong to resist, and her form began to shift, bones cracking, muscles reshaping, her human face elongating into something with too many teeth. Thomas fired. The shotgun blast lit up the night, the pellets catching Sarah in the shoulder and spinning her around. She howled, a sound that was neither human nor animal but something in between, and fled into the forest, her blood leaving a dark trail on the fallen leaves. Thomas stood there shaking, the gun smoking in his hands, not sure if he'd just saved his family or condemned an innocent woman to die alone in the mountains. He turned and ran back to the cabin, his heart threatening to explode, his mind replaying that moment when she'd looked human, when she'd cried, when she'd said she didn't want to hurt them. Inside, Rebecca and Emma pulled him through the door, locking it behind him, their questions coming fast and urgent. "What happened? Did you see it? Are you okay?" Thomas couldn't answer. He just stood there, the shotgun hanging loose in his hands, staring at the blood on his shirt that might have come from a monster or might have come from a woman, and he had no idea which truth he preferred. Sarah ran for miles, the pain in her shoulder a bright agony that fought with the hunger for dominance. The shotgun pellets were buried deep, burning like fire, probably steel instead of lead, which meant they'd poison her slowly, unless she dug them out. She found a stream, plunged into the icy water, and let the cold numb some of the pain. Using her claws, because her hands had dissolved into claws again, the human form lost in the shock and pain of being shot, she dug at the wound, extracting the pellets one by one and dropping them into the stream where they disappeared in the current. The Skinwalker magic would heal the wound eventually, faster than a human would heal, but not instantly, not without cost. Each healing took something from her, made her a little less human, a little more monster. She'd been shot before by hunters who'd mistaken her for a wolf, and each time the healing had left her more hollow, more hungry, more willing to do terrible things to fill the void. This time felt different, though. This time the wound was given by a good man who'd seen her humanity and shot her anyway, which meant the wound was more than physical. It was a reminder that she couldn't go back, couldn't be saved, couldn't expect mercy or understanding. She was a monster now, fully and completely, and the sooner she accepted that, the easier everything would become. But Sarah didn't want easy. She wanted hard. She wanted the struggle to stay human, even if that struggle was futile. She wanted to believe that somewhere inside this twisted form was still the woman who'd loved her daughter, who'd taught Shakespeare to disinterested teenagers, who'd cried at sappy movies and laughed at bad jokes and dreamed of a future that didn't include claws and hunger and stolen voices in the dark. As dawn approached, Sarah made her way to Elijah Redbone's property, the address she'd memorized from the library computer. It took her most of the night, traveling on 4 legs through the densest parts of the forest where humans rarely went. The pain in her shoulder screamed with every step, but she pushed through it, driven by a need stronger than hunger, stronger than pain. She needed answers. She needed to know if this curse could be broken, if she could ever be Sarah Whitmore again instead of this thing that wore her name like a skin. Elijah's property was exactly what Sarah expected. A collection of small cabins arranged in a circle around a central fire pit, prayer ties hanging from the trees, medicine wheels painted on rocks, the smell of sage and sweetgrass heavy in the air. It looked peaceful, sacred, a place of healing. But Sarah knew better now. She knew that some healing was just transformation by another name, that some medicine was poison dressed in promises. She waited in the tree line until she saw Elijah emerge from the largest cabin, a clay mug in his hands, his silver hair loose around his shoulders. He looked older than she remembered, the 67 years weighing heavier on him, but his eyes were still sharp, still storm grey, still holding secrets that would destroy anyone who learned them. "I've been waiting for you, Sarah," he called out, not looking toward where she hid. "I knew you'd come back eventually. They always do." Sarah stepped out of the forest, her form flickering between woman and wolf, unable to hold either shape completely. "Change me back," she growled, her voice distorted. "Undo what you did." Elijah sipped his tea, unmoved by her demand. "You know I can't do that. The transformation is permanent. Once you accept the old medicine, once you run with the night, there's no returning to what you were." Sarah lunged at him, or tried to, but found herself frozen mid-leap, held in place by something invisible but unbreakable. Elijah hadn't moved, hadn't gestured, but his will had manifested as a physical force that pinned her like a butterfly to a board. "Calm yourself," he said mildly. "Violence won't help you, and it certainly won't help those people you've been circling. The Carters, yes? Nice family. The kind you used to have." The mention of the Carters, of the family Sarah had been stalking, filled her with shame and rage in equal measure. "Why did you do this to me?" she demanded, still held in place by his will. "I came to you broken, desperate, and you turned me into a monster. Why?" Elijah set down his mug and finally looked at her directly, his eyes ancient and sad. "I did exactly what you asked, Sarah. You came to me begging for healing, for wholeness, for freedom from pain. The old medicine gave you all of that. You can run without hurting. You're stronger than you ever were. Your spine is whole. You asked to be fixed, and I fixed you." Sarah fought against the invisible bonds, her rage giving her strength. "I didn't ask to become this. I didn't ask for the hunger, for the voices, for any of it." Elijah's expression didn't change. "You asked for healing without asking what form that healing would take. You wanted the magic without understanding the cost. That's not my failure, Sarah. It's yours. The old medicine doesn't grant wishes like a fairy godmother. It transforms you into what you need to be to survive. You needed to be strong, to be pain-free, to be whole. The Skinwalker form gave you all of that. Everything else, the hunger, the voices, the isolation, those are just side effects of getting exactly what you asked for." Sarah felt something break inside her, the last hope she'd been clinging to shattering like glass. "There's no cure? No way back?" Elijah shook his head slowly. "The Skinwalker path only goes one direction. You can learn to control it, to manage the hunger, to choose when you shift and when you stay human. But you'll never be fully human again. That life is over, Sarah. The sooner you accept that, the sooner you can begin to build a new one. He released her from his magical grip, and Sarah collapsed onto the ground, her body shaking with sobs that sounded like howls. "But I have a daughter," she whispered. "I have Lily. She thinks I'm dead. I can't go to her like this. I can't let her see what I've become." Elijah's face softened slightly, the first real emotion Sarah had seen from him. "No," he agreed, "you can't. Some transformations require complete separation from your old life. Lily is lost to you, Sarah. Let her remember you as you were, not as you are." The cruelty of it, the absolute finality, made Sarah want to die. But skinwalkers couldn't die easily. They healed from almost any wound, lived far longer than humans, endured when by all rights they should be allowed to simply cease existing. She was condemned to existence as a monster, forever separated from her daughter, from her humanity, from everything that had made life worth living. "What am I supposed to do?" she asked, her voice hollow. "Just wander these mountains forever, hunting people, stealing voices, becoming more monster and less human, until there's nothing of me left?" Elijah picked up his tea again, considering his words carefully. "You have choices, Sarah. You can give in to the hunger, become a true predator, take what you need without guilt or hesitation. Many skinwalkers choose that path. It's easier, more honest in a way. Or you can fight it, cling to your humanity, suffer constantly but remain the person you were in all the ways that matter. A few manage that, though it's a hard road." He paused. "There's a third option too." Sarah looked up at him, hope and fear warring in her inhuman eyes. "What third option?" Elijah gestured to his property, to the cabins arranged around the fire pit. "Stay here. Learn from me. I teach others like you how to walk between worlds, how to be both monster and human, how to use the gifts the old medicine gave you while honoring the life you left behind. You could help people, Sarah. Use your strength to protect instead of hunt. Use your voices to comfort instead of terrify. Use your transformation to become something more than either human or monster alone." It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. "What's the catch?" Sarah asked warily. Elijah smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. "The catch is that to help others you have to face yourself. You have to acknowledge what you've become without flinching, without hiding, without pretending you're still the woman you were. You have to accept that Sarah Whitmore died in that car accident, and what's sitting before me now is something new, something that needs a new name, a new purpose, a new way of being in the world. Can you do that?" Sarah thought about the Carters, about the family she'd been terrorizing, about Emma who reminded her so much of Lily, about the voices she'd stolen to call them into the dark. She thought about the look on Thomas's face when he'd shot her, the mixture of horror and necessity, the understanding that sometimes protecting your family meant doing terrible things to people who might not be entirely monsters. She thought about who she'd been, a teacher, a mother, a woman who'd believed in the power of literature to change lives, and who she was now, a creature that fed on fear and wore stolen voices like masks. The gap between those two versions of herself was unbridgeable, a chasm so wide that trying to cross it would destroy her. Elijah was right. Sarah Whitmore was dead. What remained was something else, something that needed to decide what it would become. "I don't know if I can accept that," Sarah admitted, her voice breaking. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to let go of who I was." Elijah nodded, unsurprised. "Then go back to the mountains. Circle the Carter family some more. Keep stealing voices. Keep hunting. Keep pretending you're still human while acting like a monster. Eventually the hunger will win, you'll kill someone, and then you'll have to accept what you are whether you want to or not. But by then it'll be too late to choose who you become. The monster will have chosen for you." The words hit Sarah like physical blows, each one true, each one devastating. She could see the path Elijah was describing, could feel the hunger even now pushing her toward it, could imagine the moment when her control would finally slip, and she'd tear into Emma or Jacob or Rebecca or Thomas, feeding on their fear and flesh until there was nothing left of them or of her own humanity. The thought should have repulsed her. Instead, it made her mouth water, made the hunger surge, made her body shift involuntarily toward a more predatory form. She was closer to becoming a true monster than she'd realized. "How long do I have?" she asked Elijah. "Before the hunger wins? Before I lose myself completely?" He studied her with those ancient eyes. "Hard to say. For some it's weeks. For others, years. Depends on how strong your human will is, how much you're willing to suffer to stay yourself. But judging by the fresh blood on your shoulder, by the way you're already shifting without meaning to, by the desperation in your eyes, I'd say you don't have long, maybe days, maybe hours. Maybe you're already too far gone. Maybe—" Sarah wanted to argue, to insist she was stronger than that, but she remembered the way she'd used Rebecca's mother's voice to call Emma into the dark, remembered the pleasure she'd felt at their fear, remembered how hard it had been to pull back, to retreat, to not push further. Elijah was right. She was running out of time. "Teach me," she said, the words coming out before she fully realized she was speaking them. "Teach me how to walk between worlds. Teach me how to be something other than just a monster, please." Elijah regarded her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "It won't be easy. The training is painful, both physically and mentally. You'll have to confront every fear, every regret, every choice that brought you to this point. You'll have to die as Sarah Whitmore and be reborn as something new. And even then, there's no guarantee you'll succeed. Many fail. Many give in to the hunger and become the predators they're trying to avoid. Are you willing to risk that?" Sarah thought of Lily, of her daughter who believed her mother was dead. Maybe that was the kindest thing, to let Lily remember Sarah as she'd been, rather than know the truth of what she'd become. Maybe the best thing Sarah could do for her daughter was to become something new, something that could help others, something that could make the curse she'd been given into a gift. It wouldn't bring Sarah back, wouldn't reunite mother and daughter, wouldn't undo the transformation, but it might give Sarah's death meaning, might allow this new being to have purpose, might be the only redemption available to a monster trying to stay human. "I'm willing," Sarah said, her voice steady for the first time since the transformation. "Teach me. Help me become something that can live with what I am." Elijah stood, extending a weathered hand to help her up. "Then we begin now. First lesson, stop calling yourself Sarah. That woman is gone. You need a new name, one that honors what you were while accepting what you've become. Choose carefully. Names have power in the old magic." Sarah, no, not Sarah anymore, thought about who she'd been and who she was becoming. She thought about the transformation from teacher to monster, from mother to predator, from human to something older and wilder than humanity. She thought about the Skinwalker legends, about the creatures that walked between worlds, about the Cherokee stories of shapeshifters who protected or destroyed depending on their choices. A name came to her, pulled from the depths of memory, from a poem she'd taught her students years ago, from a line about creatures that were both beautiful and terrible, both blessed and cursed. "Waya," she said finally. It was Cherokee for wolf, but it was more than that. It was a reclamation of the transformation, an acceptance of what she'd become, a choice to be the wolf that protected rather than the wolf that preyed. "My name is Waya." Elijah smiled, and this time it was genuine, approving. "Good, Waya. The wolf who remembers being human. The human who chose to become wolf. That's a name with power, a name with purpose." He gestured toward one of the smaller cabins. "That will be yours. Rest today. Heal your wounds. Tonight, we begin your training." As Waya, the being formerly known as Sarah Whitmore, limped toward the cabin, she felt something shift inside her. Not the physical transformation between forms, but something deeper. An acceptance, maybe, or a letting go. Sarah Whitmore had died 5 years ago in a car accident, just like the official story said. What had crawled from that wreckage was something new, something that had been confused and lost and desperate to cling to a life that no longer existed. But now, for the first time, Waya felt like maybe there could be a future. Not the future Sarah had wanted, not a return to her daughter and her teaching and her human life, but a different future, one where she could use her curse to help others, where she could be a protector instead of a predator, where she could honor Sarah's memory by being the kind of being Sarah would have wanted to become if transformation had been inevitable. It wasn't redemption. Wire wasn't sure redemption was possible for creatures like her. But it was something. It was purpose, it was choice, it was the beginning of becoming someone new. But before she could fully commit to this new path, before she could begin her training with Elijah, there was something she had to do. The Carter family was still out there, still terrified, still expecting the monster to return. Thomas had shot her, yes, but he'd also hesitated, had seen her humanity, had recognized that she was more than just a predator. She owed them closure, owed them an explanation, owed them the truth about what she was and what she'd almost done. More than that, she owed Emma an apology. The girl had almost answered her call, had almost walked into the dark because Wire had used her dead grandmother's voice as a weapon. That was unforgivable, but it still needed to be acknowledged, needed to be named for the violation it was. Wire spent the day in the cabin Elijah had given her, forcing her body to hold a stable form, practicing the control she'd need to approach the Carters without triggering their fear response. It was exhausting work, fighting against the hunger and the instinct to shift, but Elijah had given her techniques, breathing exercises, and mental mantras that helped. By evening, she could hold her human form for nearly an hour, which would have to be enough. As night fell, Wire made her way back through the mountains toward the Carter cabin. This time she approached openly, wearing the human form as completely as she could manage, dressed in the donated clothes she'd stolen from behind the church. She didn't try to hide, didn't circle the property, didn't prepare to hunt. Instead, she walked up to the front porch and knocked on the door like a person, like a neighbor, like someone who deserved to be acknowledged rather than shot on sight. Inside, she heard sudden movement, voices raised in alarm. She heard the distinctive sound of Thomas's shotgun being loaded, heard Rebecca call for the kids to go upstairs, heard Emma protest that she wanted to see who it was. Wire waited, her hands visible, her body language as non-threatening as she could make it while standing on the porch of people she'd terrorized. When Thomas opened the door, the shotgun pointed directly at her chest. Wire didn't move. She just looked him in the eyes and said in her own voice, her real voice, "My name is Wire. I was the one calling to your family. I came to explain and to apologize and to promise that I'll never bother you again." Thomas stared at her, recognition dawning in his eyes. This was the woman he'd shot, the creature that had cried in the darkness, the monster that had seemed almost human. She looked different now, more stable, more present, but he could still see the wrongness in her eyes, the yellow tint that no human had, the sense that what stood before him was wearing humanity like a costume that didn't quite fit. "Why should I believe anything you say?" he asked, his finger on the trigger, ready to fire at the slightest provocation. Wire nodded, accepting the skepticism. "You shouldn't. You should slam this door and never think about me again. But I need you to know that what I did to your family, using the voice of Emma's grandmother, was wrong. It was cruel. And I hate myself for it, which means there's still enough humanity in me to feel shame. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to come back. I just wanted you to know that you were right about me. I'm not just a monster. I'm someone who became a monster, and I'm trying to figure out how to live with that." Emma appeared behind her father, pushing past his attempt to keep her back, staring at Wire with a mixture of fear and fascination. "You really used my grandmother's voice?" she asked, her voice shaking. "You made me think she'd come back." Wire met the girl's eyes, forcing herself not to look away from the pain there. "Yes, I did, and I'm sorrier than I can possibly express. Your grandmother loved you very much, and I violated that love by using it as a weapon. Nothing I say can make that right, but I wanted you to know that it wasn't her, it was me, using a gift, a curse, that I don't fully control. Your grandmother is at peace. What you heard was just my theft of her voice, and I'll carry the shame of that for the rest of my life." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "Why did you do it? What do you want from us?" It was the question at the heart of everything, the question Wire had been asking herself for days. "I don't know," she admitted. I think I was drawn to your family because you reminded me of what I lost. I had a daughter once, I was a mother once. And seeing your mother with you, seeing the way your family loves each other despite your problems, it made me remember what I gave up when I became this. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was trying to feel human again, even if the way I did it was monstrous. Rebecca had joined her family at the door now, and Jacob peeked around her legs, his eyes wide. Waya saw them all together, this family she'd terrorized, and felt the full weight of what she'd almost destroyed. "I'm leaving," she said. "I'm going to train with someone who can teach me how to control what I am. I won't bother you again, but I wanted to tell you that if you ever need help, if there's ever danger in these mountains, you can call for Waya and I'll come. I can't be the woman I was, but I can try to be a protector instead of a predator. It's the least I can do." Thomas lowered the shotgun slightly, not all the way, but enough to suggest he was considering her words. "How do we know this isn't another trick?" Waya smiled sadly. "You don't. You'll never know for sure. But I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to let me go with the promise that you'll never see me again unless you choose to call for me. That's all." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Emma stepped forward, past her father's protective arm, stopping just inches from Waya. She looked at the creature that had used her grandmother's voice, studied the yellow eyes and the two sharp teeth, and the hands that sometimes flickered into claws, and said something Waya never expected to hear. "I forgive you." The words hit Waya like lightning, unexpected and powerful and transformative. "What?" she whispered, not sure she'd heard correctly. Emma's tears were falling now, but her voice was steady. "I forgive you. I don't understand what you are or what happened to make you this way, but I can see that you're suffering. I can see that you hate what you did. And my grandmother taught me that forgiveness isn't about excusing what someone did. It's about releasing the hold that pain has on you. So I forgive you, Waya. Not because you deserve it, but because I don't want to carry this fear and anger forever." Waya fell to her knees on the porch, the weight of that forgiveness more than she could bear standing. She'd expected to be shot, or cursed, or told to leave and never return. She'd never expected mercy, especially not from the girl she'd tried to lure into the darkness. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Thank you, Emma. You're stronger than I ever was, stronger than I'll ever be. Your grandmother would be so proud of you." Rebecca put her hand on Emma's shoulder, tears in her own eyes. "Will you really protect us if we need it?" she asked. "Can we trust that promise?" Waya looked up at her, this mother who was so like the mother she'd been, and nodded. "I swear it on everything I was and everything I'm trying to become. If you call for Waya in these mountains, I'll come. I'll protect your family with everything I have, even if it costs me my life." Thomas finally lowered the shotgun completely, leaning it against the wall. "Then go, train. Learn to control what you are. And if you keep your promise, if you really can be a protector instead of a predator, then maybe something good can come from whatever happened to you." Waya stood, backing away from the porch slowly, giving them space, giving them the distance they'd need to feel safe again. As she reached the edge of the light, she looked back one last time at the family she'd almost destroyed. "I won't forget this," she said. "I won't forget that you gave me a chance when you had every right to shoot me on sight. I'll do everything I can to become worthy of the mercy you've shown me." Emma raised her hand in a small wave, a gesture of goodbye that somehow felt like hope. Waya returned it, then turned and ran into the forest, her form shifting as she went, becoming more wolf than woman as the distance grew. But this time the shift didn't feel like a loss of control. It felt like a choice, a conscious decision to embrace what she was while holding on to who she'd been. She ran through the mountains back toward Elijah's property, back toward the training that would teach her to walk between worlds, back toward a future that was still uncertain, but no longer hopeless. Over the following months, Waya trained with Elijah, learning the ancient techniques that allowed skinwalkers to maintain their humanity while embracing their supernatural nature. It was brutal work, requiring her to confront every fear, every regret, every moment of shame that had led to her transformation. She learned to control the hunger, to channel it into protective instincts rather than predatory ones. She learned to use the voices not to terrorize but to comfort, calling out to lost hikers in the voices of their loved ones to guide them to safety. She learned to shift forms consciously, to be wolf when strength was needed and woman when compassion was required. Most importantly, she learned to forgive herself, to accept that while Sarah Whitmore was gone, Wire could still honor her memory by being the kind of being Sarah would have wanted to become. The training wasn't just about control, it was about transformation of a different kind, turning a curse into a calling, a monster into a guardian. Elijah proved to be a demanding teacher, but also a compassionate one, understanding that Wire's struggle was as much psychological as physical. He introduced her to other skinwalkers who'd chosen the path of protection over predation, men and women who'd been transformed by tragedy or desperation and had found ways to use their gifts to help rather than harm. There was Marcus, a 42-year-old former soldier, who'd been changed after stepping on a landmine, who now used his enhanced senses to find missing persons in the wilderness. There was Chiomara, a 27-year-old artist who'd accepted the transformation to escape an abusive marriage, who now protected domestic violence victims from their abusers with a ferocity that was both terrifying and beautiful. There was Kenji, a 60-year-old botanist who'd become a skinwalker to survive cancer, who now used his connection to nature to heal polluted ecosystems. Each of them had a story of loss, of transformation, of learning to live with what they'd become. Each of them gave Wire hope that redemption was possible, that monsters could choose to be heroes, that the curse could become a calling. As spring turned to summer, Wire began venturing out from Elijah's property to patrol the surrounding mountains, establishing herself as a guardian of the Appalachian wilderness. She rescued lost hikers, guided injured animals to safety, and yes, when necessary, dealt with actual threats. The occasional rabid bear, the drug runners who used the remote forest trails, the poachers who killed protected species for profit. She didn't kill unless absolutely necessary, always giving humans a chance to leave peacefully, but she made it clear that these mountains were protected, that harm to the innocent would not be tolerated. Word began to spread among the local communities about the mountain spirit that watched over travelers, about the wolf with human eyes that appeared when danger threatened, about the mysterious woman who could be heard calling in the voices of loved ones to guide people home. Some feared her. Others left offerings at the forest edge, food, blankets, tokens of respect. Wire accepted neither fear nor worship, simply doing the work that needed doing, honoring the promise she'd made to herself and to the Carter family. She kept her distance from the Carters during those months, honoring her promise not to bother them again. But she watched over them from afar, ensuring that nothing threatened them in the wild places surrounding their cabin. When Jacob wandered too far from home one afternoon, chasing Murphy who'd spotted a rabbit, Wire silently guided them back to familiar trails without revealing herself. When a black bear got into their garbage in the middle of the night, she appeared as a wolf and drove it away, leaving no trace except scattered trash and massive paw prints that made Thomas whistle low and reinforce their garbage storage. She never called out, never used the voices, never gave them reason to remember the terror she'd once caused. But she kept her promise, protecting them as she'd sworn to do, becoming the guardian she'd said she would be. It wasn't redemption. Wire wasn't sure she deserved redemption, but it was purpose, and purpose was enough to keep her human heart beating inside her monster body. Then came the night everything changed again. It was late October, almost a year since Wire had first circled the Carter cabin, almost a year since she'd learned to be Wire instead of Sarah. Emma was 17 now, preparing for college applications, spending long nights at her desk, writing essays about resilience and forgiveness and finding hope in darkness. She'd never told anyone except her family about Wire, about the skinwalker who'd terrorized them and then saved them, about the monster who'd asked for mercy and received it. It was their secret, their shared trauma and triumph, something that had brought them closer as a family, even as it had changed them all forever. But tonight, Emma wasn't thinking about Wire. She was thinking about her grandmother, about the 3-year anniversary of her death that was coming up next week, about the grief that still occasionally ambushed her in quiet moments. She'd gone for a walk after dinner, needing to clear her head, needing to feel the mountain air on her face. She'd promised her parents she'd stay on the trails, be back before dark, keep her phone on. But the sunset had been so beautiful that she'd climbed higher than planned, chasing the last golden light through the trees, and now darkness was falling fast, and she'd lost the trail. Emma tried to retrace her steps, but everything looked different in the growing gloom, and her phone had died an hour ago, because of course it had. She wasn't panicked yet, but she could feel panic approaching, could feel the cold seeping in as the temperature dropped, could hear sounds in the forest that seemed closer and more threatening than they had in daylight. She called out for help, her voice echoing through the trees, hoping a hiker or a ranger might hear. What she got instead was a wolf's howl, close enough to make her freeze, primal fear overriding rational thought. Then she heard it, her grandmother's voice calling from deeper in the forest. "Emma, sweetheart, this way, I'll guide you home." For a moment, Emma's heart stopped. Not again. Please, not again. She'd forgiven Wire, had meant that forgiveness sincerely, but she wasn't sure she could handle another night of terror, another violation of her grandmother's memory. Then the voice came again, and this time Emma heard something different in it. Not hunger, not predation, kindness. "I know you're scared, sweetheart. I know you remember the last time you heard this voice, but I promised to protect you, and you're lost. And this is the only way I know to guide you home safely. Trust me, Emma. I'm not the monster I was. Let me help you." It was Wire. It had to be Wire. But using her grandmother's voice again felt like a step backward, like a return to the terror of that first night. Emma wanted to run, wanted to scream, wanted to be anywhere but lost in these dark woods hearing the voice of her dead grandmother spoken by a skinwalker's throat. But she was lost, and it was getting colder, and she could hear other sounds now. Animals moving through the underbrush, the wind picking up, the first drops of rain beginning to fall. "Wire," Emma called out, her voice shaking. "Is that really you?" The voice changed, became Wire's own voice, human and warm and achingly familiar, despite the months that had passed. "It's me, Emma. I've been watching over your family like I promised. I know you're lost. I can guide you home, but I need you to follow the sound of my voice. Can you do that?" Emma took a shaky breath, remembering that moment on the porch when she'd looked into Wire's yellow eyes and chosen forgiveness over fear. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I trust you. Guide me home." The voice switched back to her grandmother's, and this time Emma understood why. It was familiar, comforting, a beacon in the darkness that cut through her fear more effectively than any stranger's voice could. "This way, sweetheart. Watch your step. There's a route across the path. Good. Now to your left, follow the white oak. That's it." Step by step, guided by her grandmother's voice spoken by a skinwalker who'd once been a monster and was now a guardian, Emma made her way through the dark forest. She never saw Wire, never caught a glimpse of wolf or woman, but she could feel the presence nearby, protective and watchful, ensuring that no harm came to her. When Emma finally emerged from the trees onto the familiar path that led to her cabin, she stopped, looking back into the darkness where she knew Wire was watching. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for keeping your promise. Thank you for protecting me." Wire's own voice came from the shadows, warm with emotion. "Thank you for trusting me, Emma. Thank you for teaching me that monsters can be more than what they were made to be. Now go home, your family's worried." Emma ran the rest of the way to the cabin, where her parents were indeed frantic, about to call for a search party. She told them about getting lost, about Wire finding her and guiding her home, about the grandmother's voice that had saved her instead of terrorizing her this time. Thomas and Rebecca looked at each other, understanding passing between them. The monster they'd feared had become the protector they'd needed, and in doing so had proved that transformation wasn't just physical, it was spiritual, moral, a choice made every day to be better than what you were forced to become. That night, Rebecca went to the edge of their property and left an offering for Wire, a warm blanket, a thermos of hot soup, a note that said simply, "Thank you for protecting our daughter. You're welcome here any time." When she returned in the morning, the offering was gone, and in its place was a single white feather and a note in careful handwriting. "Thank you for seeing me as more than a monster. It helps me remember I'm still human where it counts. Wire. Rebecca brought the note inside and pinned it to the refrigerator, a reminder that redemption was possible, that forgiveness could transform not just the forgiven but the forgiver, that sometimes the most frightening things in the darkness were just lost souls trying to find their way home. Years passed. Emma went to college, studying psychology with a focus on trauma and resilience, her own experience with Wire shaping her understanding of fear and forgiveness. Jacob grew into a teenager who loved the mountains and never feared them, knowing that something watched over these woods, something that was both wild and kind. Thomas and Rebecca grew old together in their cabin, their marriage strengthened by the shared experience of facing terror and choosing mercy over violence. And Wire remained in the mountains, a silent guardian, a skinwalker who'd chosen to protect instead of prey, to comfort instead of terrorize, to honor the human she'd been by being the best version of the monster she'd become. She never saw Lily, her daughter who was grown now, living her own life in Charleston, believing her mother was long dead. That pain never fully faded, that loss never fully healed, but Wire learned to carry it the way she carried everything else, as a reminder of what she was protecting, why she'd chosen this path, who she was honoring with every choice to be guardian instead of predator. She continued to work with Elijah, continued to train other skinwalkers who sought a different path, continued to patrol the Appalachian wilderness and protect the innocent from both supernatural and mundane threats. She became a legend in these mountains, the wolf with human eyes, the voice in the darkness that guided lost souls home, the spirit that watched over travelers and punished those who brought harm to the wild places. Some nights when the moon was full and the hunger still gnawed at her, Wire would stand at the edge of the Carter property and remember the moment when Emma had said, "I forgive you." The moment that had changed everything. The moment that had proved monsters could still be saved if they wanted salvation badly enough. Those were the nights when she felt most human, when the wolf body she wore felt less like a curse and more like a gift, when she understood that Sarah Whitmore's death had given birth to something that could help in ways Sarah never could have. It wasn't the life she would have chosen, but it was a life with meaning, with purpose, with the possibility of redemption earned one protected soul at a time. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the forest was still and the stars were bright, Wire would use her gift one more time, calling out in voices that brought comfort instead of terror. She'd speak in the voice of a lost child's mother, guiding frantic parents to where their toddler had wandered. She'd speak in the voice of a dead husband, comforting a grieving widow who'd come to the mountains to scatter his ashes and lost her way. She'd speak in the voice of a beloved teacher, encouraging a suicidal teen who'd climbed too high on the cliffs to turn back from the edge. Each time she used the voices now, it was an act of love instead of an act of violence, a way to use the curse for healing instead of harm. And each time she remembered why she'd chosen this path, why she fought every day to stay human, even in a monster's body, why she'd accepted the name Wire and let Sarah Whitmore rest in peace. The hunger was still there. It would always be there, but it no longer controlled her. She controlled it, channeled it, transformed it into protective instinct that made her fiercer and stronger in defense of the innocent. The final transformation had nothing to do with skin or shape or supernatural power. It was the transformation of purpose, the understanding that who you are matters less than what you choose to do with who you've become. Wire had been made a monster by desperation and dark magic, but she'd chosen to be a guardian through will and determination and the mercy of a 17-year-old girl who taught her that forgiveness could reshape reality more powerfully than any spell. She was neither Sarah nor monster now, but something new, a skinwalker who remembered what it meant to be human, a predator who'd chosen to protect, a voice in the darkness that guided lost souls home instead of leading them astray. It wasn't redemption. She'd done too much harm to ever be fully redeemed, but it was purpose, and purpose was its own kind of salvation, its own kind of peace. Wire knew she would walk these mountains for lifetimes, watching over the families that came and went, protecting the wild places from those who would harm them, being the guardian these ancient hills deserved. She knew there would be dark nights when the hunger would nearly overwhelm her, when she'd have to fight harder than ever to stay human where it mattered. She knew there would be losses, failures, moments when she couldn't save everyone, couldn't protect everyone, couldn't be the hero she wanted to be. But she also knew that as long as she kept trying, as long as she kept choosing protection over predation, as long as she kept remembering Emma's words, "I forgive you," then Sarah Whitmore's death would mean something. The curse would have purpose. The monster would have a soul. And somewhere in these dark Appalachian woods, between the old-growth hemlocks and the ancient oaks, a skinwalker who'd once terrorized a family now stood watch over them, a guardian born from terror, transformed by mercy, sustained by the simple choice to be better than what she'd been made to be. That was Waya's truth. That was her story. That was her redemption. Imperfect and incomplete, but real enough to live by, real enough to die for, real enough to make the curse worth bearing and the hunger worth fighting and the transformation worth accepting. She was Waya, the wolf who remembered being human, the human who'd chosen to become wolf, the monster who'd learned that salvation came not from changing what you are, but from choosing who you'll be despite what you've become.